A teenager by the name of Calvin Cambridge resides in Chesterfield Orphanage alongside his close companions, Murph and Reg. All three share a passion for basketball and often engage in games on the orphanage's front yard. One morning, during a match, their play is interrupted by a gang of bullies led by a person named Ox. Ox challenges Calvin to a match, with the stipulation that Calvin's basketball jersey is on the line. While Murph and Reg advise Calvin to ignore the bully, Calvin, driven by his ambition and admiration for his favorite basketball players, decides to accept the challenge. The contest begins, but Calvin is defeated quite easily due to a noticeable height disparity with Ox. As promised, Ox takes possession of Calvin's jersey and proceeds to tear it apart simply to antagonize him. The director of the orphanage, Stan Biddleman, frequently tasks the children with selling candy to raise funds for their welfare. That evening, they attend an NBA game featuring the Los Angeles Knights and sell candies outside the arena. Following the game, Calvin spots Coach Wagger of the Knights as he's getting into a car. Calvin approaches the coach and offers him some candies. Upon learning that the candy sales are for a charitable cause, Coach Wagger offers Calvin a $20 bill. However, Calvin declines the money due to doubts about whether the collected funds truly reach the intended charity. Impressed by Calvin's honesty, Coach Wagger presents him with 4 tickets to the upcoming basketball game. Excited, Calvin rushes to share the news with Murph. The subsequent day, a group of couples visits the orphanage with the intention of adopting a child. While initially hopeful, Calvin realizes that the prospective parents are only interested in adopting younger kids. Later on, the children are given a box of donated clothing from a thrift store. Calvin discovers a pair of shoes in the collection and tries them on. Upon inquiring with a nun about the origin of the shoes, he learns that they belonged to a renowned basketball player. Calvin identifies Michael B. Jordan's initials on the shoes. This sparks jealousy in Ox, who takes the shoes and, in a fit of envy, throws them into the air after tying the laces together. Calvin's disappointment arises when he finds his shoes hanging from a power cable. During a nocturnal thunderstorm, Calvin wakes Murph and Reg, seeking their help in retrieving the shoes from the cable. In the rain, they venture outside where Calvin climbs a tree near the cable. As Calvin reaches for the shoes, lightning strikes, causing Calvin to fall along with the shoes. Fortunately, he escapes serious injury. Calvin notices an unusual energy in the shoes but doesn't dwell on it. The next day, the kids head to the arena once again to sell candies. As promised, they receive 4 tickets from the coach. Ox and his friends become envious and threaten to report that the tickets were bought using charity funds. To prevent trouble, Calvin offers Ox one of the tickets. The group enjoys a game between the Knights and the Minnesota Timberwolves. During halftime, star player Tracy Reynolds and a coach participate in an interactive show. Calvin is unexpectedly chosen from the audience to face Tracy. Despite initial skepticism, Calvin scores. Encouraged by the crowd. As the contest progresses, Tracy must prevent further humiliation and exert himself against Calvin's skillful play, which includes a slam dunk that astounds the audience and embarrasses Tracy. The next day, the Knights coaches negotiate with Biddleman to allow Calvin to play for a day, eventually convincing him with money. Calvin's friends celebrate, but Ox is infuriated. Recognizing the magical nature of the shoes, the kids keep it secret, except Ox, who overhears. Calvin enters the Knights' changing room, causing irritation to Tracy. Teammates anticipate a competition for Tracy's position, although Calvin's role is largely for publicity. Calvin is outfitted with a Knights jersey and new shoes, though he requests to wear his old shoes. The coach, focused on publicity, disregards Calvin's attire. Calvin's presence is seen as a mere spectacle, with little concern for his actual performance. After Calvin's most recent game, his popularity has surged dramatically. This, in turn, has led to a significant increase in the number of spectators within the arena. Initially, Calvin is benched for the first half of the game. However, as their team faces the prospect of defeat, Calvin approaches the coach, requesting an opportunity to play. Although met with skepticism, the coach grants Calvin a chance. Despite not wearing his usual lucky shoes, Calvin's nerves get the best of him. Frustratingly to everyone present, he calls for a timeout and hurries to the locker room to change back into his old shoes. Upon his return, his confidence has notably improved. The young player efficiently aids his team in narrowing the point gap with their opponents and ultimately secures victory. Following the game, Calvin enters into a contract to participate with the team for the remainder of the tournament. As he prepares to depart for the tournament from the orphanage where he resides, Calvin is confronted by Biddleman. This individual desires to continue as Calvin's guardian due to the financial benefits involved. Biddleman warns Calvin to be cautious of those seeking to adopt him, as they might only be interested in his wealth. During the flight, Calvin and Tracy are assigned to share a room by the coach. Calvin is thrilled to be rooming with his idol, but Tracy does not share the same level of enthusiasm. That evening, they must adhere to a curfew, which Tracy plans to defy. After providing Calvin with guidance on utilizing room service, Tracy departs for a date. Calvin takes full advantage of the freedom to dine wherever he pleases, resulting in a room littered with half-eaten food upon Tracy's return. Anticipating spending the night with his date, Tracy's plans are thwarted when Calvin falls ill. Instead of a romantic evening, Tracy and Calvin find themselves taking care of the sick boy. Despite going to bed late, Tracy struggles to sleep due to Calvin's loud snoring. The subsequent day brings an important match, and Tracy is fatigued. Calvin inadvertently informs the coach that they stayed up late, resulting in a warning that Tracy will face suspension if he violates curfew once more. From that point forward, Calvin participates in several games with the Knights and contributes to their unbroken streak of victories. The opponents are caught off guard by the young player's exceptional skills, unsure of what to expect when facing him on the court. He attends multiple press conferences and earns a substantial income from them, which he uses to purchase numerous presents for the children in the orphanage. Additionally, he secures victory in the NBA slam dunk competition, propelling him to become a highly talented and promising basketball sensation. One evening, Calvin engages in a conversation with Murph about his newfound life and the enjoyable experiences of playing in the NBA. Unfortunately, an envious individual named Ox overhears their discussion and launches an attack on Calvin in an attempt to steal his shoes. The altercation concludes when Biddleman steps in, reproaching Ox for assaulting his companions. Biddleman's concern is driven by the fact that Calvin's financial success significantly benefits him. During the team's stay at a hotel, Tracy embarks on a trip to the pharmacy to acquire sleeping pills and allergy medication to ensure a restful night's sleep before the upcoming match. Calvin decides to accompany Tracy on this errand, despite Tracy's irritation with the arrangement. Along the way, Calvin inquires about Tracy's family, discovering that Tracy has a father with whom he no longer communicates. This notion is foreign to Calvin, as he longs for caring parents. However, Tracy remains reticent about his family and continues driving. A mishap occurs at the pharmacy when Tracy mistakenly consumes a sleeping pill instead of an allergy tablet, causing him to fall asleep before he can return to the hotel. Aware that missing curfew would result in Tracy's suspension, Calvin takes the wheel and drives back to the hotel, albeit colliding with several objects in the process. As a consequence, Calvin faces suspension the following day due to his joyride. Tracy feels remorseful that Calvin is being punished for his error. Later, during their return flight, Tracy expresses gratitude to Calvin for shouldering the blame and protecting him from the consequences. Spending time together has caused Tracy's fondness for Calvin to grow. Once Calvin returns to the orphanage, numerous individuals express interest in adopting him. This situation stirs jealousy in Murph, who desires the attention of potential adoptive parents. Manipulating the circumstances, Biddleman arranges meetings with subpar parents for Calvin to dissuade him from being adopted. Unimpressed with the adults he meets, Calvin decides to remain at the orphanage. On a particular weekend, Calvin pays an unannounced visit to Tracy's mansion. Impressed by the grandeur of the house, Calvin confides in Tracy about Murph's resentment, his struggle to find suitable parents, and an impending geometry test. In an effort to address these issues, Tracy encourages Calvin to invite Murph over. While awaiting Murph's arrival, Tracy makes geometry engaging for Calvin to prevent boredom. Playfully, they engage in a paint fight, which eventually leads to Murph joining in, putting aside his disagreement with Calvin. On the subsequent day, Calvin and his companions gather, discussing the challenge of finding responsible parents. During this conversation, Calvin shares the story of Tracy in his strained relationship with his father. His friends propose that Calvin intervenes to mend their relationship. The following day, Calvin meets with Tracy's father and brings him to Tracy's home. However, Tracy's father becomes enraged, considering Calvin's actions an invasion of his privacy. This leads to a heated argument between them. Meanwhile, the Knights, Calvin's team, have a critical match against their formidable opponents, the Toronto Raptors. However, Despite the upcoming match, Calvin and Tracy haven't resolved their issues yet. Due to this unresolved tension, the Knights lose the game. The coach reprimands the team for their poor performance in such an important match. With only one match left, their entry into the playoffs hinges on its outcome. The next day, a couple visits the orphanage, expressing interest in adopting Calvin. Although Calvin remains doubtful due to past disappointments, Biddleman encourages him to give the couple a chance. Biddleman helps Calvin prepare for the meeting, emphasizing the importance of looking presentable to make a favorable impression. Before leaving, Calvin entrusts his cherished lucky shoes to Murph, urging him to safeguard them at all costs. Murph tests the shoes by wearing them, attempting to imitate Calvin's playing style, but he fails to do so. He reflects on his mother while struggling with the shoes. Ox and his friends coerce Murph to reveal the shoes' location. Reluctantly, Murph divulges the information under pressure, leading them to the hiding spot. Following this, Biddleman meets his associates and places a substantial bet against the Knights in their next game, confident that Calvin's performance will suffer without his lucky shoes. Meanwhile, Calvin goes out to dinner with his potential adoptive parents but feels out of place. Simultaneously, Tracy reconciles with his father, missing Calvin and talking to him before their upcoming match. Tracy contemplates adopting Calvin but decides not to disclose this after meeting the couple he visited earlier. Just before the game, Murph contacts Calvin and informs him about the hidden shoes. Calvin rushes back to the orphanage to retrieve them. The other kids help Calvin confront Biddleman, demanding to know the shoes' location. Ox initially tries to assist Calvin but changes his mind when Biddleman insults him. As usual, following the routine, he retrieves the shoes from the safe and returns them to Calvin. Subsequently, everyone hops onto their scooters and heads back to the arena. Biddleman manages to free himself somehow and contacts his associate to prevent Calvin from reaching the game. The men attempt to hinder Calvin, but the kids delay them, allowing Calvin to enter the arena. As a last-ditch effort, Biddleman obstructs Calvin's path, trying to stop him, but Calvin strikes him with his scooter and successfully makes his way to the game. Upon his arrival, his team is trailing by a significant margin. Once he starts playing, they quickly catch up to the opponent's score. Nevertheless, he is tackled during the game, resulting in his shoes getting damaged. An anxious Calvin believes his ability to perform is tied to the shoes, thinking he can't score without them. Tracy encourages him, explaining that the shoes only provided confidence and that his true talent comes from within. Eventually, Calvin pushes forward with the game and contributes to his team's victory. Desiring a regular childhood, Calvin informs his coach of his decision not to renew his contract. He returns to the orphanage, which has undergone changes due to Biddleman's departure. Tracy reveals his intention to adopt a child and invites Calvin to be his son, with the condition that Murph joins them too. Their friend Reg is adopted by a different family. In the end, both Calvin and Murph playfully engage in a mock fight with Tracy in their new room. That concludes the content from the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more similar content, please subscribe, like our video, and consider leaving a comment if you'd like us to recap your favorite movie. Until next time, take care.